Welcome everyone. This is Elizabeth Clare and Elton Brewington, and we are with Discover Brightside, a video podcast. This is a very important event that we do, and this is our 8th year. And I'm very grateful that Colonel Donna Fore is here, and she has served our country, and she has just been such a wonderful person in our lives. As even after her service, she continues to serve the community every single day. And we are so grateful to you, Donna, for everything that you do. So I'm going to let you tell your story, and we thank you for breaking the story on our channel. We're very grateful to you. Thank you with grateful hearts.
Thank you, Claire. And I want to appreciate everybody showing up tonight. I know it's Monday night. We probably have a lot of balls that we're juggling in the air to do tonight, but I appreciate you coming by for a few minutes. And I want to also thank, I met Gwen Borden and I met Samantha Silverman and Bill Wagner in my breakout room. Bill I had heard from before because he's part of that Wagner team of making books together. And then was encouraged to hear that Samantha was a survivor at the World Trade Center. So that's a very interesting story I'd like to hear. And of course, Gwen was a clinical social worker and dealt with a lot of the families and individuals that were suffering after the attack. So my hat's off to all of you for the work you did in the post 9/11 era. That's an amazing contribution to the healing of our country. I'll just kind of rewind my day a little bit for you guys so you know what I went through on 9/11 as an individual person, and then we can take a few questions, time permitting. So at the time of the attack, I was stationed. That was my duty station, to be at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. It was a busy place. 30,000 people work at the Pentagon. It's a small city unto its own. So you can imagine how difficult it was to deal with an attack when you've got 30,000 people to get out of the building. But so that day started out normally. It was beginning to feel like fall in Virginia. So it was a really beautiful, crisp day. In fact, one of my recollections from walking into the building that day, because I always got there pretty early, was I had looked up and the sun was just coming out and said, oh, it's going to be a great day. It's blue skies and it's going to be really fantastic day. And there was a little bit of cold air in the air. So it was kind of pleasant. I was energized for the day. I thought it was going to be a great day. It was on Tuesday, so we'd made it past Monday. So I thought, great, Tuesdays are a lot easier than Mondays. I worked in the Pentagon with the air staff. I worked for a 2-star general that ran all of Air Force intelligence. My specialty was intelligence. So my job was to prepare him with all of his reserve intelligence forces to make sure they were ready for any contingency by providing funds to there were over 30 reserve intelligence centers scattered around the United States and overseas to provide training for these reserve intelligence personnel. So it's my job to look after those facilities and provide money and training and whatever they needed to keep them going. And I appreciate everybody putting your contact information in the chat. That's great. I hope this is being recorded, but if it's not, we'll just have to get together later on. So that was my typical job. I always got there early before the general got there because I wanted to give him any updates or urgent, responsibilities that needed to be taken care of in terms of what I did. When I got there that morning, I got there usually before everybody else. I worked in this office. It was kind of a vault. It was like the vault you might see in a bank or something like that. It had a secure door, and inside the facility was another secure area. There were only a handful of us working in there. At least 3 of us were military, and then there were 2 civilians that had their own separate area where they did some special programs for the Air Force. On that particular day, I had seen the 2 civilians come in, but they had gone to some meetings. Just after they came in, they dropped their things and went to some meetings. So I knew that they were in the building somewhere. That's important. Not knowing where people are became an important problem after the fact. Also, it was interesting too that the only other military that were in the vault with me had meetings outside the building. So I was essentially the only one left in the office, except for these 2 civilians when they kind of scurried out. On the day of the attack, I didn't know there was anything going on until I got a phone call from the general that I worked for. He had a secretary. She called me and said, Donna, please come over here quickly. I thought I was in trouble. when a general officer wants to see you, it's not usually good news. So when I got there, she points to his office and she says, meet me in there. And we get in there, she's got the television turned on, and there's been the first plane has impacted on the World Trade Center. And she's pointing out, she says, what do you think of that? I said, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. Normally, an aircraft of that size doesn't lose its way inside of a big city like New York City. It's very, very strange because the way it had hit, it wasn't like it just kind of suddenly, lost its way or had a malfunction. It was like it intentionally was going towards that part of the building, which I thought was very odd. We're talking, and then eventually the second plane rolls in and hits the second tower. At that point, I kind of glanced at Frances and said, Frances, where's General Schaefer? She said, he's down the hall at the joint staff meeting. I said, please go and get him. I said, and she said, why? I said, I'm pretty sure we're under attack. And she said, are you sure? I said, I'm pretty sure. This is not anything random. This is deliberate. So she runs off, and then I realized I probably should call my husband because he was a pilot himself at one time, not in the military, but a private pilot. So I want to get his take on this. When I call him, he's not doing anything with the TV. He doesn't know anything's going on. So when he turns it on, he says, Donna, planes don't lose their way in New York City. I said, no, what do you think? He said, it looks deliberate. I said, that's what I was thinking. Well, a few minutes go by, and I'm chatting with him on the phone, trying to make sense of all this unusual activity in New York, thinking it's all up there. I'm not thinking there's anything else going on. And about that time, it feels like an earthquake. The building seems to shudder and move, and it pushes me across the room in my chair, and I drop the phone. And for a minute, I'm a little stunned because now I realize that whatever's going on in New York City has come to Virginia. And so I rush over to pick up the phone, and Steve said, what happened? I couldn't hear you. I said, I think we've been bombed. I really wasn't sure whether it was a bomb or one of these airplanes. I said, I got to go. And I just hung up on my husband. I didn't say, I love you, please take cover or something. All I could think about was, I've got to get into action. I've got to execute whatever, emergency evacuation plans we have. And there's a lot of emergency evacuations at the Pentagon because it's constantly got bomb threats. So everybody was very prepared for this. So I checked the vault to make sure I'm the only one left in there. And then I lock it. It seems weird to lock up after something like that, but I did. So I locked it because that was protocol. And then I start to notice that as I'm trying to get into the hallway, just standing there looking, that the hallway is full of people. They're all like shoulder to shoulder, and I can't really get into the crowd. But just behind them, I see there's smoke behind them coming. That's why they're moving all towards me, because they're trying to get away from all that smoke. And I realized, okay, whatever the problem is, it's over there. And the smell smells like jet fuel to me, because being in the military and being on aircraft all the time, you get to where you understand what that smell is. So now I realized, okay, this was no bombing. This was a deliberate attack with an airplane onto the Pentagon. So now this thing is much bigger than I imagined. When I finally can get to an exit, the primary exit I would have used was at the side of that attack. So I had to use a different exit. When I get outside, we all have our assigned work area groups that we're supposed to head towards and then do accountability, count heads and get names and make sure we know who everybody is. I went to the designated place. There was a group leader there to do accountability of all of us. And then we realized most of us didn't really ask, where did our colleagues go? Where are they right now? Are they still in the building? Did they leave the building? That was a big deal that we didn't ask those questions. So a big takeaway from 9/11 was always know where your coworkers are, because someday it may matter in terms of finding them after a big attack like that. So we learned a lot of lessons. We continue to pull together our group, and people are arriving at different times because they're in different parts of the building. Everybody's not there. So then we realize, okay, some people must have been outside the building, or maybe, unfortunately, maybe they are at the site where the attack was. After we've been outside for just a short amount of time, there was a secondary blast on the side of the building closest towards where we were standing. We didn't know if this was some kind of humans outside the Pentagon blowing things up. We really didn't know what was going on. There was a lot of confusion at the site of 9/11. We later realized that that was the there's a helicopter pad that's right next to the Pentagon to bring in dignitaries, whether it's the president or the Secretary of Defense. I guess his new name is Secretary of War. And when the plane impact wasn't that far from that location, so as it began to, the fire was moving around the building, and it finally reached that location. And there's a big fuel bladder beneath that landing pad. So that big fuel bladder blew up, and of course stuff went everywhere. So it was quite catastrophic. So now we're thinking, okay, this fire is moving towards us. So we begin to get pushed further and further away from the building for our own safety. They didn't want us to go home right away because they wanted to do these accountability processes, right, to find out who's there and who's not, and where is everybody. Now you can imagine how hard it was to keep a group together when there's 30,000 people that work at the Pentagon, and we're all out in the parking lots trying to find each other. It was pretty chaotic. We then, after that fuel bladder explosion, we then hear boom, 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 boom. And we, again, didn't know what it was. We weren't sure exactly whether it was part of the Pentagon attack or some other situation going on. And then we look overhead, and there are combat air patrols flying over our building and the entire city. So now the entire District of Columbia has fighter aircraft armed, providing combat air patrols over the city of DC. And we realized there's something else going on, because they wouldn't put those planes up if they didn't think there was some other plane out there. Now, we're not getting much word because there's just so much confusion going on. But sometimes we'd hear inklings of, they think there's another plane out there. There could be a couple of planes out there. It's all very scattered information. So then we realized that the aircraft were scrambled from the DC Air National Guard because of that other plane that was out there. And that's why they scrambled those planes, because they knew there was another plane headed for some other targets within the DC area. So we're getting just bits and pieces of information. After we'd been out there for quite some time, we actually thought we were going back into the building. I know that sounds kind of insane, that you think that after the building's attacked, you'd go right back to work, but we're military people. We're used to, working under unusual conditions. So we kept asking, hey, can we go back in? No, you can't go back in. Just stay put. We're still doing our thing, and we're just trying to get a grasp on things and keep everybody together. Eventually, as the day wore on, we found out that some of our headquarters elements were reconstituting in other parts of DC. They had found them a place to work in some other secure kind of facility, mostly owned by other companies, like a big company like Lockheed Martin might have a secure office space. And they relocated some of the leadership of the Pentagon to those places. We were told to stand fast. We weren't important enough to go to those other places. We were just supposed to hang out there, wait for further instructions, as you'd say. Eventually, when it became obvious that the fire wouldn't be out quickly, that it was a pretty major event, they told us, hey, if you can get home, just try and get home and then wait for further instructions once you're at home. You'll get a phone call from your leadership to give you some idea of what to do for the rest of the week. I said, okay, this is going to be a problem for me because I have no, bye, Dawn, I'll talk to you later. I have no way to get home because I took a bus in. Now, at the point of the attack, a bunch of things happened that normally you could rely upon. Metro wasn't running. The bus system wasn't running. Everything was in chaos. And everybody that was released from their jobs, and some people weren't released, they just went home. They just said, I want to be with my family. I don't want to be at work while this kind of chaotic situation is going on. So the federal government workers were all released all at once. Say, go home. We think there's more attacks underway. Just get out of here. So now you've got a gridlock going on in DC where literally you can't go anywhere. Even if I didn't have a car there anyway, but even I had, I wouldn't be able to get home. So we wait for quite some time, hoping that maybe the traffic will die down and we can figure out how to get home. Luckily, by then, the crowd that I'm with has begun to dwindle down. Some people are trying to find other ways to get out of there. They wouldn't let us take cars out of the parking lot because it was now a crime scene, and your vehicle might have debris from the building or something else on your car that they need to evaluate. So they were telling people, you can't take a vehicle out of here. You're just going to have to figure it out. So we're trying to figure it out. Well, I'd seen a DC policeman kind of in our area roaming around, and I went over and talked to him, and I said, hey, there's a gentleman in my group that his car is way over here. He's way outside the blast area. We need to all get home. Can he take us home? And he said, he looked around like he was looking to see if anybody noticed. He said, yeah, you guys get out of here. So we pile in his vehicle. He eventually starts taking people home. I tell him to make me the last stop because I live the furthest away. I'm over an hour away from the Pentagon. So he does. And he says, where can I drop you off? He said, I'll take you to your house. I said, no, that's too far. I said, just drop me at the closest metro stop. He said, but the metro's not running. I said, that's okay. I'll figure it out. All right. I'm an officer. I can figure things out. So he drops me off at a metro stop that's not too far from Fort Belvoir. When I get there, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do, but I say, well, I'm just going to go inside and just think about this. When I get in there, I see something that's very helpful. I see a payphone. Nowadays, you never see payphones anymore, but back then they were pretty common, but particularly in metro areas because people needed people to pick them up for rides and things. So I managed to, when I was leaving the Pentagon, I always kept a little change in my pocket. I don't know why, but I did. And I had just enough change to put it into that payphone to call my husband and tell him that I was alive because, see, I hung up on him. So he doesn't know what happened to me after the initial blast. He's grateful to hear my voice. And I told him that, that when we stopped talking, I needed him to call his mother and all of my family and let them know I was still alive because I was certain that they thought I had died in the blast. And I said, I don't want my family thinking I'm dead. I want them to know I'm just fine. So he did. He said, I'll promise to do that. And he said, how am I going to get to you? I said, well, take your time. There's no way you can get anywhere right now because it's just totally shut down on the highways right now. So when you think it's safe and the traffic is cleared, you can come and get me. So he fought the traffic all the way up north because we live down south and finally picked me up. The rest of the day, I just sort of tried to process what had happened. When I got home, we had a landline. Cell phones didn't work for a few days up in DC. I'm sure in New York City they were down for quite a while. So there's no way to call anybody on a cell phone or any kind of a electronic device of that nature. So you had to use landlines. So we still had a landline where I lived. So I called my parents. They were very relieved. Called my mother-in-law's family where she was living, and they were all very relieved. And I waited for that infamous phone call to give me further instructions. So around midnight-ish, I got a phone call from the headquarters Air Force asking, is this Lieutenant Colonel Donna Fore? I said, yes, it is. They said, tomorrow morning, you're to report to the Pentagon as early as you possibly can get there. And you're to wear your battle dress uniform, otherwise known as BDUs to military people. We are at war. He said, do you have any questions? I said, no, I don't have any questions. I hung up the phone. I said, wow, this is it. We're going to war with whoever did this. Now, we had an inkling who it was. We kind of thought it was Osama bin Laden because he'd been basically threatening to do a lot of things to America for quite a long time. But we obviously needed more proof than that. When I got to the building that morning, I got up early, got in my car, and drove to the Pentagon. So thank you, Priya. Some brave Americans had draped these big American flags over every overpass driving into the city, and it gave us so much hope and inspiration that we're going to fight back, that no matter what happens, Americans pick themselves up, they dust themselves off, and they go about and do their business. And so it was a very special moment to see those big American flags over, and even to now, you can tell I'm getting emotional because it was an inspiring sight. So, and that is the essence of being an American, right? That we do dust ourselves off and pick ourselves up and we go on with it. Right? We don't let anybody stop ourselves. We keep going with the mission. When I got to the building that day, it was like a war zone in there. It was there was water everywhere. Obviously, there was soot on every wall. There was smells from the firefighting. The hallways were dark. The power was out in half the building. It was hard to get to my office because of this situation. And something really eerie. Have you ever seen one of those boxes that has the glass and it says break open in case of fire? I'd never seen this before, but every single one I passed was broken open. They'd dragged the hoses out of every single one of those boxes. And I just was very stunned by that. When I could finally get to my office, it was, by the way, it was very few people there that day. The military was there, but most of the civilians had opted to take leave and stay home, which is probably the best thing to do, because it was hard to get any work done those first few days, because the systems weren't working well. The power was out in some of the building. The people you needed to work with weren't around. It was heavy being in there, knowing that some people that you knew that were on that side of the building, you wondered about them. It took a while before we knew the status of the people in that part of the building. The site of the attack was with headquarters for the Army's personnel office. So all personnel matters for the entire Army went through there. A 4-star general died at his desk that day, and everybody pretty much in that office, with the exception of maybe a handful, made it out. So that was devastating. I did a lot of work with them. Also, the Defense Intelligence Agency, think of the CIA, but the DOD's version of that. They had a budget office of about 25 to 30 people in there. They all got wiped out. I did a lot of work with them on budgeting and finance. They were all gone. And then there was a Navy Command Center that was also affected. But so those were the three big offices. A lot of other offices were affected, but those were the most devastating with the highest casualties. And the highest ranking person to die at the Pentagon was that general officer. So, but again, we didn't know this for several days. We're just worrying and waiting and wondering. And again, because of the Pentagon's structure, because it's a very old building. I don't know if you know this, but it was built for World War II. So it's not a brand new building. It's undergone a lot of renovation. I'll mention that in just a second. But because of its old structure, they would add new things and improve the building. But the one thing they didn't really improve upon very well was notification systems. There were some parts of the building where if there was a fire alarm, you'd hear, we called it the voice of God. It was some kind of a system that would broadcast alerts. In some parts of the building, that worked well. In some parts, it was either non-existent or hadn't been checked and didn't work. That was a big problem. The lack of notification. There were people, weirdly enough, in some parts of the building, mostly in the basement areas, because there's a bunch of floors above the ground, but a few below, that never got notified there was a problem at the Pentagon. And they found them hours later still working like there was a regular day. They had to be notified. Oh, did you know there's been an attack above ground and you need to get out of here? Oh, no, we didn't hear anything. So that was a big problem, was notification. So notification was a problem. Accountability was a problem. Just understanding what to do in a situation of that large magnitude. Being able to reconstitute quickly. It took a while for the Pentagon to get back on its feet. And remember, we're at war. So our whole job right now is shifted from peacetime to wartime, which is a whole different set of responsibilities and resources and activities that we have not been doing for a while, right? Our last big war prior to 9/11 had been Desert Storm and the Balkan Wars, which were over with pretty quickly. So this was a whole different kind of mindset from a lot of the people that were working at the Pentagon. So we got to work quickly, we reconstituted, and we got on with business. My main task, and I'll try and wrap this up because I know we need to have other people speak, but my big task when I got in that morning, General Schaefer told me, he says, Donna, I need every reserve linguist you can find that speaks Arabic and a host of bunch of other languages, right? Because in the Middle East, as you know, it's diverse like we are. There's a lot of different ethnicities in the Middle East, and not all of them speak Arabic. Some of them speak, a whole host of languages that we didn't have a lot of linguists for. So I had to find these people, make sure they were fit to come back on active duty. Some have been off active duty for quite a while. Some of them need a refresher on their language skills, and some of them just needed to learn how to get back into the military. And they all had security clearance problems because they hadn't been in the military in a while. So I had to noodle through all these diverse problems and figure out how to bring these people back on active duty. The most heartening thing about me contacting all these reservists, and I must have called hundreds and hundreds of them, is every single one wanted to come back on active duty and do their part for whatever length of time it would take. And I told him, I said, I don't know how long you're going to be on active duty. I don't know where you're going. You could be going to Afghanistan. You could be going to Iraq. You might be going to some Pakistan. I don't know where you're going. That's okay. I've trained for this. I want to do it for my country. Now, that's an amazing mindset that people just wouldn't care about their own families or their businesses or whatever they were doing at the time. They just wanted to do whatever they could to help their country. That's the essence of Americans, right? So very proud to be part of that and to be able to help those reservists get back on active duty and help with the war effort, right? So in the days and weeks to come, we did find out that our comrades were gone. I lost 2 women that I worked with and that I had Bible study with in the Army's personnel office. And then there were all of those budget analysts in the DIA office. I worked with a lot of them, and they had perished. I didn't know anybody well within the Navy Command Center, but those were the 2 officers I had a direct relationship with. So it was sobering to think about the fact that I made it out and they didn't. You get sort of that guilt complex that why did they make it out and I didn't. If the plane had kept going, it would have impacted the side of the building I was on. But weirdly enough, that area of the Pentagon had recently been refurbished, so that part of the building was actually a little stronger and could survive the attack. And it's still amazing to me that there wasn't more deaths from that attack because the building had been strengthened. Obviously, everybody on the plane perished. So that was devastating to learn that as well. So after that, we just worked 24/7. I didn't take any days off from 9/11 until some part in early 2002. We started to get a few days off. Secretary Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense at the time. He didn't take any days off either. He was there every day. We had Saturday staff meetings. I mean, it was just, we were on a war footing. No days off, no chance to rest. So there were times I stayed at the Pentagon till 1 o'clock in the morning trying to, get the job done. And I'd have to call my husband and say, you have to come and get me. And even a shift to take me to a hotel for a few hours to sleep. I said, I've got to get out here for a few hours. I can't sit at my desk and go to sleep. I'll never be able to work tomorrow. So he would accommodate my crazy schedule and, all I was up against. So that's my story. I want it to be a hopeful story for you guys, though. I don't want you to focus on the devastation, but on the hope and the resiliency of the American people to come back after a devastating tragedy where 3,000 people perished on that day. And Gwen and Samantha can appreciate this. There's still, the Office of the Medical Examiner in New York City is still identifying remains from those buildings in New York City. It's an ongoing labor of love for the building, for the people that were in the building that died, for their families to know, hey, a piece of your loved one was identified, however small it was, but then bring them some peace. There's still a lot of unidentified remains. So some families still don't know what happened to their loved one, but thank God for those offices in New York City that continue to identify the remains. So.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Donna.
Service,
and
Donna.
It's hard for her to just tell us the story every single year for 8 years and for us to listen to it. And each time you talk and tell us the story, it talks about your bravery and your just your survival, to come on our channel. So thank you, Donna. We appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Let me say this. We live in America, one of the greatest nations on earth, and we have the benefit of such brave and courageous men and women of our military. And they defend and protect us, and they keep us safe, and they are willing to give the last, morsel of their resource to keep us safe. And so it's something proud to think of now, even as we reflect on what happened and the memories that Donna has. We're great. I'm grateful that I live in America. I'm grateful that America is such a prestigious and honorable nation, and that you, me, us, and all our devoted comrades have the benefit of such incredible resources. And those men and women that died on that day, and gave their lives to protect and shield, and even those later, you know, and that's why we do this.
That's
why we do this. Mm-hmm. We do it to remember, we do it to reflect, and we do it to bring, honor and remembrance to what we stand for and who we are and what you belong to. we belong to something truly, truly, truly incredible.
Yes.
Truly, truly, truly incredible.
Yes.
So I'm grateful for you, Donna. I'm grateful for the men and women that have sacrificed and gave their lives for our defense, and the men and women who died on the plains. And I'm grateful that we live in such a nation and a country. And so, along with you, I cheer you. I'm thankful, and we are just standing on the premises of such profound, incredible courage. And we keep on standing. We keep on being thankful, and we keep on reflecting and remembering. We've got so much to be thankful for. And so we are taking these moments to reflect in our gratitude,
Yes.
to reflect in our gratitude.
Yes.
And let our gratitude be bold.
Yes.
Let it be courageous, and let it be principled.
Yes.
So that being said, I just want to take these moments to reflect. And even though it's only 3 days away and 24 years, I mean, it's 24 years ago.
24 years.
Yeah, 24 years ago. And
Yeah.
so, hey, here we are. And 24, 25 will be just as big. And so, I mean, and as in New York, they reflect on the. I haven't been to the wall yet to see what was the final casting thing, but I stand with you, men and women, and I stand with you. And I don't know if you've lost anybody during these times, or if any of your family has served in the military. That I just need you to stand with us and to be thankful, and we pray and we hope nothing like this ever happens again.
Yes.
But we'll stand. I mean, we
Yeah.
we do what we have to do. We do what we have to do.
So I want to thank you all for being in our studio today. And for those of you watching this on Facebook or Instagram or anywhere that you see this video, or YouTube, we want you to write us a comment. If you have a story to share, let us know. We will be recording until September 11th. So if you want to record your story, just get in touch with our station manager, and we will be happy to put you on as well. We're also doing a 2-day event next week, so you still have an opportunity to tell your story and tell us what you think and give some love to Colonel Donna Fore and thank her so much for her service and her bravery. We thank you
Thank you,
so
Donna.
much, Donna. We thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
All right.